We've all heard it, right? There has to be consequences. But what if consequences are just punishment with a new name? In this episode, we're dismantling the outdated logic of control and moving towards purpose driven responses rooted in growth, understanding, and long term change. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Welcome back to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're shaking the foundations of behavior management. If you ever used or heard the phrase, they need to learn a lesson, this episode is for you. Now, let's face it, a lot of traditional behavior strategies are about power and control. The old punishment reward kind of thinking is about obedience. Like there is things out there as far as how to train a child like a dog and things like that is built on the principles of behaviorism. And they can work to some degree with some individuals. But does this teach people to actually mask their distress to avoid punishment and become more afraid of failure? Is it actually helping us long term, some of these strategies, as far as improving our resilience in later life? I would argue that actually it's been highly detrimental. And although many of us out there, or many people out there, sometimes, the way we were parented never did me any harm. And yet they're taking medication for mental health issues. They're struggling with professional boundaries. They're not succeeding in certain areas of their life that they wish they could. So something may have not been that bad, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be better. So we call it sometimes consequences, but if it's often just rebranded form of punishment, and punishment might stop a behavior in the short term, but it rarely teaches anything useful long term. So purpose over punishment. In my book, Targeting the Positive, I talk about new logic thinking, coming from ideas from various other sources. But it's a mindset where we don't ask, how do I stop this behavior? But what is this behavior trying to tell me? And how do I support learning from it? There's a complete difference in that. I sort of say, do I want a child to use good manners because they're scared not to? Or because they really see the value of how manners can actually improve connections, relationships, and help them to build connections? That's it. Surely it's the second one, rather than I just want them to be scared not to do the right thing. So let's bring in some theory. In both restorative practices, but also neuroscience, so restorative practices and restorative justice, which a lot of schools are starting to utilize restorative practice now, it shows us that when people are part of making things right, behavior improves. We are a social species, so making us aware of how our behavior impacts both us socially, but it affects others. We're laterally leaning into our empathic nature rather than trying to just create fear to control those behaviors. But also in neuroscience tells us that punitive responses activate the limbic system, our threat brain. So when someone's in survival mode, they can't reflect or change as easily. And this is the thing, we may be able to condition somebody to stop what we perceive as a negative behavior by making them scared to do it. But is that making them a better person? Or is it just conditioning them to fear behaving in a certain way? So let's say a child throws a chair. Instead of exclusion and saying, that's it, you'll never come to school again, We support them to repair, maybe writing a letter, making amends, understanding what upset them and how they could manage their emotions differently next time, how it might have impacted other people and things like that. What if a person refuses a medication? Instead of ever restricting or scolding, we explore why. Why may they not want their medication? Is it something about the nature of it that they're struggling with, or can we help? Is it fear, confusion, or loss of control, or is it something about the actual process that's causing them distress or discomfort? We're constantly moving into an exploratory and curious state of mind, as so often you hear me talking about in these podcasts. Within my book, we talk about the process of, rather than just jumping in and kind of like going, we must punish the behavior. I often say my first step in six-stage target model is identifying behaviors. And there's always two types of behaviors that we want to identify. We want to identify adaptive behaviors. They're the ones that are beneficial. But so let me explain what I mean by adaptive and maladaptive. And I may have done this on another podcast. But adaptive behaviors are behaviors we use to either meet our needs or to cope with stress that are beneficial for our well-being and often viewed as society as being positive. Whereas maladaptive behaviors are behaviors that we use to either meet our needs or to cope with our stress that's detrimental for our well-being and often perceived by society as being negative. Rather than, so my whole concept as far as identify is we want to identify the adaptive behaviors. We want to encourage and reinforce and promote and enjoy and celebrate. But we also then need to find the maladaptive behaviors that we need to understand. Now, notice how I didn't go the adaptive behaviors we want to reward and the maladaptive behaviors we need to punish. So the adaptive behaviors we need to reinforce and the maladaptive behaviors that we need to understand. Why have they chosen a maladaptive behavior rather than adaptive behavior? There'll be a reason for it. Otherwise, if the adaptive behavior was easier or paid more, worked better, it was if we take from Atomic Habits, it was easy, obvious, attractive, and rewarding, then surely they'd use an adaptive rather than a maladaptive. So there must be a reason for it. We can ask post-incident and reflection, so important as far as, what happened? How were people affected? What needs to happen next? How are they feeling at the time? What could they have done different? What could have gone wrong, or what did go wrong as a result of the way that they behaved in that moment? We also respond to the person, not just behavior. We should never focus purely on the behavior, but always the person behind it. If we're looking at behavior being a form of communication, a way of expressing, or what's wrong for them, what are they feeling, or what might have happened in the past that's causing this, we then can focus on the person to better understand them, not just try and eliminate the behavior through some kind of punishment system. So old logic says that you should control the behavior, whereas new logic says that we should connect before we correct. We're looking to build a connection with the person rather than just trying to inhibit it through punishment. Now, just to expand a little bit on punishment and sometimes where there is a difference with consequences, because sometimes consequences are, I so often I'm teaching groups and, well, this person did this. What's the consequence? What's the consequence? And they still focus on the negative side of how should we then inhibit the behavior. I'll see in my book, I talk about the targeted to positive as a whole premise, and target itself stands for the behavior that we track, we acknowledge, and then we either reinforce or role model is what we're going to get. So if we are engaging and finding somebody being abusive, we're tracking when they're being abusive, we're acknowledging when they're abusive, and then maybe we're abusive back, or we just paid them attention when they're being abusive, well, that's what we're going to get. If instead we focused on, well, what behavior do we want instead of abusive? Well, we want respect or manners, for instance, and then when they track when they're using respectful behavior, we acknowledge when they're using respectful behavior, and then we role model and reinforce all respectable behavior, well, that's what we're going to get. That track, acknowledge, and then reinforce and recognize, role model is what we're going to get. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about moving over to the new logic. But it's also about going deeper, always looking for why this, why now. We're looking always for what's going on underneath the behavior rather than just focusing on the behavior itself. This is how we build relationships. This is how we grow connection. This is how we build trust as well. And trust is so important for helping an individual to manage their emotions, to better manage change, transitions, relationships in general. is through building that secure basis, those trusting relationships they can kind of grow from there. But when it comes to punishment, so within things like applied behavior analysis, there's two types of punishment. And one is it's what we call positive punishment, and there is negative punishment. Now, that doesn't mean good or bad. So, positive punishment is a punishment or a stimulus is provided to reduce the chances of behavior occurring. Whereas negative punishment is to remove a positive stimulus to reduce the chances of that behavior occurring. So, an example of like positive punishment could be telling off, even like a smack or giving lines at school. Whereas a negative punishment would be removing something positive. So removing something positive would be like losing break times at school, or taking my attention away from you and ignoring you for a bit, for instance, or taking your electronics off you. Now, these are all examples of still punishments. And the thing is that they can just cause further deterioration. They reduce quality of life. They actually then potentially damage self-esteem. And damaging person's self-esteem rarely leads to more positive outcomes. In fact, quite the opposite. Now, I'm not saying that sometimes there isn't potential consequences to actions, and sometimes there is. But I do find that sometimes people are looking for justice rather than teaching. If a child doesn't know how to write, we teach. If they don't know how to drive, then we teach. Or anybody, if they don't know how to do something, we tend to teach them. Apart from they don't know how to behave. And then our instinct is we need to punish. We need to have justice. There must be some consequence they have to pay as a result. This also comes from this concept that we sometimes think that this is the way the world works, that good things get good things and bad things get bad things. And there is an inherent, concept of this, a cultural kind of perception that this is how the world works. And it just isn't the case. If you really think about it, think how many good people there are out there that are struggling every day, and how many bad people out there, or people who've done bad things, who could be living an amazing life. The reciprocity doesn't happen equally, but that becomes hard. But shifting that understanding, shifting that sometimes, bad things don't happen just because a person has been bad, also reduces the chance of victim blaming and improves compassion, because societies that believe that bad things only happen to bad people obviously mean that then people who are struggling don't get the help, support, and connection they need, because there's an assumption if they're struggling, they must be bad. And there's so much we need to do to move away from that concept in society. So hopefully over the course of the session that I've kind of just talked about here, moving away from this old logic thinking into this concept of understanding and growth and connection. When have you ever used punishment and seen no real change as a result of it? I'll give you a prime example. I'm watching a lot of Malcolm in the Middle at the moment, just going back to some old programs. And it's just one of those things I could put in the background while I'm doing other stuff. And the parents in that are so punishment overdrive. And yet it seems to make no difference to the behavior of the boys long term. It actually just seems to cause distrust, disconnection, and I don't know, just negativity. So what might have a purpose-led response, or what could they have done differently to what would it have looked like? So when you think about leaving behind the mindset of managing behavior and you move towards understanding it instead, that's when we're making real progress and improving what we do on a day-to-day basis. If you found anything I've spoken about useful or interesting, please like, comment, and share. Maybe share it with somebody who could do with hearing this, who feels that they don't know what they're doing as far as behavior management is concerned and they need some help. Thanks.